Hey, sports card fans, it's John Wade Boggs fan. Hope you're all doing well. Whether you collect vintage cards or modern cards, pre war cards or ultra modern cards, or even non sports cards, whatever you are into as a collector, I'm sure at some point when you first started off, you had that dream card or grail card that you would have loved to be able to add to your collection. And for some of you, you were fortunate enough at some point to acquire that dream card and now have a new dream card or grail card that you want to have in your collection. Well, that's the question that Greg over at MidLife Sports Cards is asking everyone for his question of the week. What was your dream or grail card? And what is your current dream or grail card? And if that is different or if that has changed over time. Well, I am one of those fortunate ones who was able to pick up my original dream card. And so now I have a new dream card or grail card that I would love to have in my collection. So at some point here, I'm going to turn the camera around and show off and talk about the dream card that I had when I was first starting off collecting, what that card meant to me. But before I do that, I want to talk about my current dream card. And I'm going to bend the rules a little bit here to Greg's question and talk about two cards that are my dream cards or grail cards. And the reason why I'm mentioning two is the first one is a card that, if all goes well, I would have enough money saved up for this year's national that I'm hoping I'll be in a position and can find the right card to pick up my current dream card. So if all goes well, I want to talk about what card would be following that as my dream card for my collection. So the card, and I've mentioned this fairly recently as for my goals for this year's national, my current dream card is the 1954 Topps Hank Aaron rookie card. Once I put together my 100 cards for $100,000 list and decided to embark on some player runs, Hank Aaron for me was sort of on the top of the list. And of course, his rookie card is such a beautiful card that that's the pinnacle of at least of all the different player runs that I'm looking to do right now. His rookie card there and completing the Hank Aaron Topps Playing Days run is at the top of my list. I'm just 4 cards short, including his rookie card. So I'm almost there with his Playing Days run. And of course, his rookie card is the big card in his run. Such a great player icon within the sports card collecting community and the hobby. And you just can't deny that his rookie card is such a beautiful card. Now, with my budget, I'm probably only going to be able to look at maybe a PSA 2, maybe a 2.5 if the price is really right and it's an outstanding copy, because I do want to have some money left over to pick up some other cards. So let's assume that I am able to pick up the Hank Aaron rookie card at this year's National. What would be my remaining or new dream card for my collection? Well, that card would be the 1934 Gaudi Lou Gehrig card number 37. So he has 2 cards in the 34 Gaudi set, but card number 37, and that is the one with the yellow background and the close-up picture of Lou Gehrig. I've always thought from my early days in collecting, and I'll talk about that when I show off my previous dream card. But whenever I looked back at vintage baseball cards, the 34 Gaudi Lou Gehrig, I've always thought is probably, in my opinion, I I'd struggle to find another one. I would say it's the most beautiful card that's ever been produced. There are a lot of other challengers. Don't get me wrong, and I'm sure you have maybe a different favorite in terms of what's the most beautiful baseball card ever made. But there's just something about that card. Lou Gehrig's smile, the yellow background, the design of the Gaudi card for 1934. It is it's just such a beautiful card of an outstanding player. I don't own any playing days Lou Gehrig cards. I don't own any 34 Gaudi cards in my collection. So that one would be my ultimate dream card to own in my collection. As to being able to afford it, it took a lot for me to save up what I'm going to have for this year's National. And if I were to acquire a 34 Gaudi Lou Gehrig card with the same budget that I'm bringing to this year's National, I may only be able to afford like a PSA 1. And that's a card that I wouldn't just want to say I owned with it being in any type of condition. That would be one that I would want a bright yellow background. Yeah, I could have some rounded corners, but no creases. I would want to have a fairly nice copy of that card because it deserves to look really nice. Now, I'm not talking about a PSA 6 or 7 or anything like that, but something around a 3 or 4. It would probably take double my national budget. And so I don't see myself being able to save up that amount of money for a national. And if I do, it would probably be going to the national, picking up that card, and that's it. So I don't see a Lou Gehrig card in my immediate future. I do see, again, I'm hoping I can find the right copy for the right price of the 1954 Topps Hank Aaron card at this year's National. If not, I had have the money saved up. Maybe I'd be able to find one on eBay, but it would be really nice to be able to hold that card in my hand, look at it, all the different angles and so on, before spending that amount of money. Because if I do pick up that Aaron rookie card, it would be the most money I've ever spent on a single baseball card. So it would have to be, again, the right card, the right price for me to part with that amount of money for me. So that's my current immediate dream card. And I talked about my future dream card. So let's talk about the dream card that I had when I was first starting collecting. So I'm going to turn the camera around, show off that card, and explain why it was my first dream card. Now, you may be thinking that since I've acquired my original dream card and that I'm a Wade Boggs super collector, that my first dream card was some big Wade Boggs card. But that's not true. It's not a Wade Boggs card. I started collecting back in 1978. That's when I first bought my first pack of cards. And for a while, I really wasn't into collecting or a hobby. It wasn't a big thing for me. It was just something fun to do, picking up some packs. So I did that for 78, 79, 80, into early 80s. It probably wasn't until the mid 80s, I guess, that I really started focusing or put more attention or more importance on my hobby, thinking about what cards I wanted to buy, what single cards I wanted to buy, as opposed to just randomly buying packs of cards from the current year, or putting sets, or asking for complete sets for Christmas or my birthday, things like that. So from 78 to the mid 80s, didn't really have any focus, wasn't concerned on any dream cards or anything like that. And of course, for my Boggs collection, I really didn't start collecting Wade Boggs cards until the late 90s. So Wade Boggs is not part of this story here. So mid 80s, by that time, the Beckett magazines and other price guides were out there, and I was looking through them, not just for information on the current cards at that time that were being released, but also at some of the vintage cards and vintage sets. So even all the way back then, I had an interest and love for vintage cards. It was just that I didn't have a whole lot of money at the time as a kid. So even a $20 vintage card was sort of, I didn't have the mindset of, well, let me save up my allowance, or let me try to find some odd jobs to earn some money so I could afford, at that time, for me at my age back then, a really expensive vintage card. So I just kept with the current stuff. At some point, I started adding some vintage cards to my collection, but nothing major. But there was one card, and looking back at the Beckett price guides or other price guides, I'd thumb through cards from the 70s and 60s and 50s. There was always one card that I told myself, man, I would love someday to own. But even back then, it was, I don't know what the card went for back in the mid to late 80s. Um, but it was one that was sort of out of my reach. And it's a card that wasn't originally supposed to be produced at all. It was a card featuring one of the greatest, if not the greatest, hitters of all time, and a player who played their entire career for really the first team that I ever followed, and that's the Red Sox. So if you know vintage cards, you probably got from all the hints what my first dream card was. And it was one that I picked up 2 years ago at the Chicago National. I'm still amazed that I still own this card. I think this may have been at the time the most amount of money I ever spent on a card, and it is the 1954 Bowman Ted Williams. And the reason why this was my dream card, again, various factors. One, this is a card that was never meant to be produced. In 1954, Ted Williams had an exclusive contract with Topps. In the 54 Topps set, of course, he's featured twice, card number 1 and card number 250. Well, Bowman went ahead and issued a Ted Williams card, and I don't know if there was some legal action that Topps did, but said, "Hey, you can't include Ted Williams in your set." So, somewhat early on in the production run, they pulled Ted Williams and replaced it with, I think it was Ed Pearsall from the Red Sox. So this card was one that was never supposed to be made. So that's one thing that always fascinated me about this card. The other one, of course, it was Ted Williams. And I knew even back then, especially from my mom talking about, at the time, listening to the Red Sox, later on watching the Red Sox, that Ted Williams in Massachusetts was God. He was the king of baseball. Ted Williams was the greatest baseball player ever. And so I was always fascinated with Ted Williams. And the other thing is just the how beautiful this card is. I've always loved just the simple portrait, his little smile there, how he has his cap sort of, off to the side, um, and the facsimile autograph signature down there at the bottom. The basic design of the 54 Bowman set, I like. Here's the back as I talk about it. And so this was a card that, again, was always out of my reach. I never really thought of trying to do anything to acquire this card when I was younger. But once I started building my vintage baseball card collection, once I started getting on YouTube here, so about 5 years ago, um, this was this was a card that I really hoped someday I would be able to own. And I had enough money saved up 2 years ago to take with me to the National. Found this copy here. And it's not in the best numerical grade, but for the most part, there are no creases in the card. There may be maybe a slight little, I don't know if that's a paper loss or some nick or something, which obviously has to do with the condition, but it's well centered. I don't care about the uh, issues with the corners of the card. I just think this is a beautiful example of the 54 Bowman Ted Williams, and again, I am so blessed and lucky that I feel that I have this card in my collection of one of the greatest hitters of all time, a card that really wasn't supposed to be produced. Now, just because it was pulled, this card isn't super rare. You can find copies out there. There were enough made before Bowman was forced to remove them from their set. But there are a lot more. I think Jimmy Purcell. I think I said Ed. I think it's Jimmy Purcell. Apologize for getting the name wrong there, but there are a lot more of his cards out there from the set than the Ted Williams card. So that's, and of course, with my mom growing up, a Red Sox fan, you know, everyone talked about Ted Williams, and I think everyone that knows baseball history just knows of his accomplishments, his service to our country as well, in two wars, and the time he served there, and just what his career numbers would possibly have looked like if he didn't serve those two stints in the military. I think people have done some extrapolations and estimates and stuff like that, and those numbers are quite mind-boggling for the time that he played the game. So yes, this was my initial dream card to one day own in my collection that I am so proud to have in my collection now. So Greg, thanks again for another great question for your audience this week. Looking forward to your next weekly question. And with that, that's all I have for you. Until next time, thanks for watching.